I don't know about you, but I personally wish this pandemic was over. And this is getting quite personal for those of us at Hero. What you see on the screen are two things. One is an expert named Lindsey Leininger, expert in infodemics and infodemiology. You're going to learn a lot about this in the next hour. The other thing you see on your screen is Hero Forum 21. I've brought this onto the screen every time I've introduced the webinar for months from now. It used to be that I would open our webinars by cajoling you, urging you, reminding you that you've got to get to Austin, Texas in October 11th through 15th, because as always, we're eager to get back together. I am so disappointed to remind you all, if you've not seen it in your emails already, that we've decided we've got to go, for safety reasons and a variety of other reasons, to a fully virtual event. You'll see me come back to this and share my excitement about what we've got in mind for you. But for now, let me just say, I'll admit to being angry and disappointed and frustrated. And it's not as much as you might think about this pandemic that won't go away. It has more to do with this infodemic that feels to me like it's getting harder and harder to cope with. So it is not a coincidence, you guys, that our theme for this year's conference is called Bouncing Back, boosting mental resilience and building organizational immunity. We thought of that over a year ago as we anticipated we'd be bouncing back from the pandemic. And we are, I think, in many ways bouncing back from the pandemic, but not so yet for the infodemic. So to help us think that through and talk about and teach us about infodemiology, I'm so delighted to have an encore opportunity with Lindsey Leininger. Many of you are Hero members. You remember Lindsey was a featured faculty member for us on our think tank that had to do with misinformation and disinformation. She taught us so well at that point. I said to Lindsey immediately after that think tank that we need to get you in front of our national audience and remind these folks who are so interested in health promotion that there are specialists now like you who are really joining us to try to get the right information out there. You are a clinical professor of business administration at the Tuck School of Business. It's a Dartmouth College business school. You're also a public health scientist. People can read about you on Tuck School's webpage. But I'd also commend them, if you jump over to Tuck School's webpage, to read this biography and how Lindsey Leininger became a nerdy girl. It's a lovely, well done piece by Kirk Kardashian. She was interviewed by a Kardashian, no less. I was so interested in Kirk's great writing. I looked his biography up, and as you perhaps don't need to be reminded, he's not really one of those Kardashians. He's a brilliant writer, and he did a great job, Lindsey, with your good work. And of course, he introduced everybody, as you did at the think tank, and as you're doing again now, to Dear Pandemic. This is such a brilliant website. Search for over 1,000 posts, you guys. This is women powered. We love women at Hero, and we champion women and all other folks that we can who need to be out there being discovered and being heard from. And is this a cast of really smart and accomplished characters? Lindsey, you're one of the co-founders and advisors to Dear Pandemic, but this list of characters goes on and on. I was pleased to see we have wonderful Midwest representation, a lot of smart people from our universities in Wisconsin, but this is all over America and all over the world. You can jump onto Dear Pandemic. I like, Lindsey, that you've organized this by category. I've thought a lot about vaccine mandates, so I could jump over to the 332 posts you guys have put there on vaccines. I've thought a lot lately about uncertainty and misinformation. I'm obsessing about it, frankly, lately. I can jump over and see 100-some posts that you and colleagues have written about that. There's also videos here. You did a beautiful job on the news with what you called hygiene theater. And what I think was so impressive about this interview was that he really did highlight, I thought for all the right reasons, there's a difference between the new facts that they're dealing with and what you, I think, came too often is the emotions behind our decision making have as much to do with what's holding us up or moving us forward. And not to mention, as much as you're doing a ton of popular writing, and this website, Dear Pandemic, is something everybody should know about and everyone should refer to. You are a big hitter when it comes to science writing and business writing as well. If you jump onto PubMed, I meant to ask you about this. Look at you between 91 and 95. I'm thinking kids. Lindsey, might I be right? Did it happen?
There's 2 Lindsey Leiningers. Can you believe it?
Oh, got it. Okay.
Publishing on PubMed. Yeah. So.
Got that. Fair enough. Well, you're both. Combine you two, and you're busy as can be. And really, people should look for some of your good work there. But I'm going to stop sharing, Lindsey, and have you take over the screen. Teach us a little bit about infodemiology. You are the editor-in-chief, co-editor-in-chief of a new journal dedicated to infodemiology. So people should know about that as well. And as usual, I'll be watching Q&A as they come in, Lindsey. If there's something that just can't wait, I'll jump in and let you know. Otherwise, we'll save Q&A for the end. Early bird catches the word. You'll for sure get your question in if you jump in anytime. And then we have some polls that Lindsey and I will talk through as well. So with that, Lindsey, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for that warm and kind introduction, both personal introduction and introduction to Dear Pandemic and the Nerdy Girls work. So I am a new associate editor at a new infodemiology journal. I'm happily not in charge, but I'm very excited about the journal and its efforts in the building science of infodemiology. And particularly for this audience, I think that health promotion professionals really are going to have a unique role to play and are uniquely skilled for this work. And I hope to convince you why with my talk today. So what I want is for everybody just to take a second and think to themselves about what the most frustrating COVID falsehood you've encountered is. The myth that just kind of won't go away or won't die, or that your family or friends or colleagues just keep coming at you with. So take a second and just keep that in your mind as we go through the next couple slides. So I'm going to give you my answer. And my answer is that COVID is no more dangerous than the flu and all of its many sort of related hydra that have been out there for really the past year and a half. This piece of misinformation just drives me crazy. It's the one that gets under my skin. I polled the Nerdy Girls yesterday on our Slack channel, our communication channel, and I think overall the vaccines cause infertility myth won in terms of the other Nerdy Girls, kind of the one that really gets under their skin. But this was me and one of the other Nerdy Girls. This is the one that really gets under our skin, that we just, no matter how much good communication we do, we just, it just keeps coming back. Okay, so why does this matter? So, I mean, again, think about the piece of misinformation that drives you crazy that's in your mind, and I'm going to think of mine too. And I hope to convince you, and I'm sure you already know this, just perhaps you haven't articulated it and thought yet, this is dangerous. It's a threat to our health. Because misinformation, like the mantra that COVID is just a little bug, you know, not even like the flu, it reduces the salience of the threat. So it makes this disease seem less serious than it is. It impacts people's behavior. They do not take mitigatory measures or do not buy into mitigatory measures. And last but certainly not least, as someone who supports policymakers in my past and as someone who is a scientist working in public health, our field is beleaguered by a lot of distrust in the public and a lot of the misinformation and the disinformation, which is like the intentionally bad information, sows distrust for those of us who are working to further the public's health. So I'm going to just give a few kind of stories from the front line here and my experience with Dear Pandemic. As Paul's intro nicely teed up, by day, I teach health analytics at Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business. By night, I am on Facebook fighting COVID misinformation as one of a team of nerdy girls. Our all-women team has scientists and clinicians covering disciplines from epidemiology, demography, health policy, economics, behavioral health, nursing, primary care, behavioral science, immunology. So we've embraced this idea that a pandemic's a whole of society problem, and so we need a whole bunch of disciplines represented on our platform. We got started in March 2020, answering questions from our friends and family on Facebook. This was not intended to become or grow into a public education campaign. We just decided to pool together and answer our friends and family's questions a little more efficiently as a unit, as opposed to one-on-one. And now the movement's grown. We did formalize it into a formal public education campaign. It's called Dear Pandemic. We are now a nonprofit called Those Nerdy Girls. We're very excited that that paperwork has gone through. We have posted over 1,000 posts on our website and our Facebook page. Our Facebook community is now 102,000 followers strong. And we have about 150,000 followers across other, all social media platforms. So the Dear Pandemic community is strong and thriving. And it is truly the privilege of my career to date to be its steward. One thing that Paul mentioned, and I just will reinforce this again, a big goal of ours with the website is to make it very easily searchable. So if you go to the website, you can just type in any question you have, and chances are there's something on there for you. So I wanted to share a little bit about the specifics of our content. So we have 4 general types of educational posts that we provide. So let's look at the left-hand column here first, and specifically the top left. So we take on the burning scientific controversies of the day. So last week, this natural infection versus vaccine-induced infection, which is better post, this was in the news. This is a big old target for purveyors of misinformation. This post performed really well, where we explained the relative benefits of vaccine-induced immunity as opposed to natural immunity. So again, burning scientific controversy of the day, that's one of our major content areas. Now, if you look at the bottom left, the second major content type that we produce are just brass tacks tactics for how to do something practical to get yourself through this pandemic. So this is another post from last week. How do I make an air purifier? So literally, if you wanted to build this yourself, how do you do it? We also write posts in this vein, like, which are the best masks for kids? Buy this mask, not that mask. So very specific practical advice is always very much appreciated by our community. If you'll go to the right-hand column now and look at the bottom, you'll see this post from last week talking about helping an 8th grader cope with anxiety about the start of school. Now, here's the thing. We early on, thankfully, this was just like happenstance and good luck, that early on we had 2 behavioral health nurses, nurse PhDs, join the Nerdy Girl team. And they told us early, we need to be consistently providing good mental health contact. And I am so glad that they are on the team and have been doing so steadfastly this whole time, because the psychological context of a pandemic is awful, as we've all lived through. And so having a consistent mental health beat, I feel like, has been a really important part of our efforts. Last but not least, let's go to the right-hand column, the top right, where to go for good vaccine info. This is something I wrote a couple weeks ago. I have been the driving energy behind what we call the infodemiology beat. So we've talked about, in the broader narrative, we hear how we're fighting both a pandemic and an infodemic, where we have an information emergency, too much information, bad information, just it's information overwhelm. So we write a specific beat that helps people find and curate good information and helps them become critical consumers of health media. So as we've done this work, we were very much a startup when we got started. We were a health promotion startup, and twists and turns, some of them right, some of them wrong. But as we've been doing this now for 1.5 years, we've built ourselves towards a communication framework. It's really a set of principles that underscores everything that we do at Dear Pandemic, whether it be write our Facebook content, whether it be give talks, whether it be in conversation with local public health leaders. Our communication principles, I would say, are written in stone as much as anything is written in stone these days in a pandemic. So we call these our let's learn principles, and I'm going to go through each one in turn. So the L is for listen and engage. An entire literature in health communications talks about how a quote unquote two-way comms strategy is more effective than a quote unquote one-way comms strategy. What does that mean? In real life, we all know being in a conversation is more effective than being lectured at. That's all that says. The science bears out kind of common sense. We take people's questions and answer them in a Dear Abby style way. So that lends itself really nice to a two-way communication channel. Also Facebook, because you can comment and it really does grow community, lets us hear our community a lot and lets us sort of adapt our content to what they want to talk about and indeed learn from them. The E is for map and engage the relevant information ecosystem. What we're up against as health promotion professionals, and really like across public health and medicine period, is that the information ecosystem that we are living in is so fractured and it keeps fracturing. So as we get more social media platforms, as people stop watching sort of the mainstream traditional news, everybody's going into their own little corners in the information environment. And so we have to proactively build bridges to people in other parts of the corner and other corners of the environment. Again, I'm going to give you an example. So we know we are not the right messenger for all audiences. We have our audience, but we know we need to partner to reach communities that we care about. So yesterday, a couple of nerdy girls in Wisconsin have been proactively partnering with Wisconsin's Head Start, which is the early childhood education that's publicly funded. And they have been doing trainings with Head Start teachers and administrators to help empower them to be trusted messengers in their communities. So we really see our as empowering other nerdy girls and nerdy guys, if you will, to be an influence for good health information in their own corners. T is for transparency first. So transparency engenders trust. Transparency is everything. It's a core professional virtue of mine, but it's incredibly important for this work. The science is changing. There's a lot of uncertainty. We have to be open and honest. Also, we're all volunteers. We will mess up. We just have to mess up, fess up. That's our mantra. Last but not least, we source and data from the best, and we really strive to be open, humble, and voracious learners. I mentioned we learn from our community, our Facebook followers all the time. We are trying to stay in conversation with tons of other scientists with unique expertise relevant to the pandemic. And as I mentioned before, we have a dedicated beat in our campaign that focuses on helping others in our community learn how to source and vet data and source and vet information. So my pitch to you, and I've already alluded to it, but now is where I'm going to lay it on a little bit thick, is that in my heart of hearts, I knew this to be true, but now I know it in my heart, having done this work over the past year and a half. Access to credible, relatable health information is a key social determinant of health. And like all networks in our society, information networks are socially patterned. And I have seen, doing the outreach work over the past year and a half, that workplaces can play an incredibly important leveling role in terms of increasing access to good, credible health information. Because I have done a lot of workplace coaching and a lot of workplace fireside chats that I feel have been quite effective, thanks to thoughtful health promotion professionals, who took care to organize the event well. This is our lane. I mean, this is what health promotion does. We engage, we empower, we educate. This is what our training is. This is who we are as people and as professionals. The good news is that there's a new scientific movement that's emerging that's really going to help us in our work, and it's called infodemiology, again, as has been alluded to a little bit earlier in the presentation. This new science is all about characterizing and intervening against health misinformation, especially health misinformation that spreads online. I really believe that workplace infodemiology is going to be so critical in the future. We've seen it with COVID. We're going to see it going forward. Again, we have this fractured and fractious landscape of where people get their information. People want to hear from their employer. We have seen survey data on that. Often employers do a really good job of finding what's called a relatable and a credible source. Let me give you an example. My friend's a faculty member at Indiana University, and he said, oh yeah, we've been having these great town halls by Aaron Carroll. Aaron Carroll is a faculty member and now administrator at Indiana University. And he also writes for the New York Times, right? So he's credible as a science communicator, and he's relatable because he's one of their own. And I think that people bringing the right, relatable, credible messenger into the workplace has so much power to help us fight the epidemic in a really meaningful way. Trust is everything. I mean, it's not, I can't even say this strong enough. Trust is everything. And again, as health promotional professionals, you know this, like you know this in your bones, but we must build and capitalize upon trust to get this work done. People trust local sources. If you look over and over again at poll data, survey data, people don't trust Congress, but they trust their local Congress member. People don't trust physicians, but they trust their personal doctor. There is so much more trust in local places and spaces, and a workplace is often a very local place. In addition, some are obviously international conglomerates, but some of them have very local footprints. And I think that that's really important when we think about extending reach of good information. The World Health Organization has an incredibly thoughtful piece of technical guidance on risk communication policy and practice. And I dusted this document off. It's one of these reports that sadly often gets shelved and doesn't really get used, but I dusted it off and I read it and I thought it was beautiful. And I think it is really beautiful, particularly in talking about who can do epidemiology work quite credibly. It's people who are transparent, timely, easy to understand, acknowledge uncertainty, address and engage affected populations, linked to self-efficacy, so help people know they can do something about their circumstance, and have some savvy and dissemination across multiple platforms. And this, to me, beyond the pandemic, this is health promotion work. So I'll give you another example. I trained the community health workers, built the training, delivered the training to the community health workers who helped sign people up for Obamacare insurance at the launch of the ACA. Classic health promotion work, and similar skills came into play there. So I just kind of love this characterization of the skill set of a health promotion professional, even though that's not its sort of intended, or not necessarily its intended objective. We know as practitioners in this field that successful behavior response interventions, that is hard, slow work. So all of the people and all of the narrative around vaccines and people getting impatient around vaccine hesitancy, those of us in health promotion, we're like, we know, like none of us really anticipated that this would be like an easy, oh, okay, like you got the science figured out now, shots in the arm will be easy. Behavior change is hard, slow work. And personal connection is a key mechanism. So you have to lean on personal connection to help people, to bring people to the right information, to make them feel empowered to make good decisions about their health. My pitch to you, as I said earlier, enter workplaces. Already exist as hyper-local information hubs and digital information hubs too. Those of us who have worked in distributed workplaces still feel a connection to our workplace, even though we're distributed across geography. The how, tactical tips. So sometimes I would say the most pressing questions I get from people who want to do this work, or even just give like one epidemiology talk in a setting, in a workplace setting, is like, literally, how do I do this? How should I make my materials? So first and foremost is activate and engage your internal influencers. So everyone has people in their lives, in their community, who are positive, who are forces for good, who people turn to, who are very pro-science. And so activate them and engage them and make it a team effort. Launch and steward some sort of two-way communications channel. So for us, as I mentioned, it's a Dear Abby-like question and answer, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be a question box or a digital question box. This concept of a fireside chat where it's moderated and questions come in from employees. I've given a lot of those over the past year and a half, and it really brings employees in co-creating the event because it's their questions that are centered in the conversation. Be sure to disseminate tools that promote both health literacy, which I think we're kind of used to. That's more of our traditional aim in health promotion, but also information literacy, because information literacy and media literacy are becoming health literacy. You cannot be health literate if you cannot find, source, and vet information about healthcare online. That is just a key competency now. So you'll see here to the left, we talk about using your smarts. S is for space, M is for mask, A is for air, R is restricted social bubble, T is for time, S is for shots. So we have talked about using your smarts to stay safe from infection risk this whole pandemic. But we also talk about staying safe from mis and disinformation risk. And that's they're exemplified in this post to the right. So we give people tools on how to talk to a conspiracy theorist in a gentle yet effective way. So we have to help people reduce infection risk and also reduce information risk in terms of the harmful stuff that's out there. So the last part of our Let's Learn communication principles framework is we let learning science lead the way in our tactics. I identify first as an educator. That's my primary professional identification. All of us at Dear Pandemic are educators of some sort, and we consider what we do to be educational in nature. So that's sacred to us. As such, our work is infused with, inspired by learning science. And for those of you who might be interested in reading a recent review of learning science, because again, this is bread and butter health promotion, I really like this Ulrich Boser book. It's a tour de force in terms of corralling everything that's been learned. I mean, really, there's been like a renaissance in this field, I would say, in the past 10 to 15 years. He corrals it, he translates it, he summarizes it. It's a terrific read for those who just want to get caught up and percolate on how it might affect your own work. So the wiser tactics, these are our learning science tactics. They really center on worked examples. Our brains don't like abstraction. They liked work examples. So in the post you saw on the last slide about how to talk to a conspiracy theorist, I actually wrote out an example conversation that went out with that post. Our brains like images. Visuals get us processing information faster than words. Pictures have power. Although we're all volunteer, we do this on a shoestring, we don't have much money, we have prioritized spending our money on a graphic designer. We have literally put our money into this I in the wiser tactics, into images. Stories are psychologically privileged in our brains. We use storytelling whenever we can. Similarly, analogical thinking, analogies, compare, contrast, it's one of the strongest ways to learn something. Our brains learn really well from analogies, so we use those a lot. We also honor our brain's working memory limits, and we chunk topics into the rule of threes. So when I talk about scientific studies, for example, I talk about comparative control, the role of chance, and the role of context, which is, to the scientists in the crowd, internal validity, statistical precision, external validity. And I help people vet headlines using the 3 C's of control, chance, and context. Last but not least, and this will come as no surprise to anyone on this call, because again, we are all educators, repetition is key. We expect forgetting, we expect the need for reinforcement, so reinforce we do. So I put this together earlier when I had the good fortune of talking with Hero earlier this summer. There are all kinds of topics that lend themselves well to an epidemiological approach that I feel like health promotion folks could put together right now. And in fact, if you're interested in any of these, please feel free to email me. My email's on the last slide, and I can get you the good materials to talk about. I literally pulled these examples for stuff that the nerdy girls know and do. So it's not just for COVID, right? Like, misinformation preceded the pandemic. It will be with us long after the pandemic. Healthcare is just ripe for the picking in terms of misinformation because it is so emotion laden, right? It's so, people get so anxious, so upset that that is really, that's where misinformation likes to center. So, again, I really am hoping that with this talk, other people in health promotion feel like you can do this work too. This is not about me. This is not about nerdy girls. This is about really building an army of nerdy girls and guys who are pro-science, who are pro-people, who want to keep people safe. And I want everyone to know that you do have a role to play. Sometimes it's easy to be a nihilist about this problem of misinformation, but given that every person basically is a local influencer of some sort, we can all make a big dent with this work. I try to keep this quote in mind, that the right message from the right person at the right time can save lives. And this is why I do the work with Dear Pandemic. This is why I teach. This is why I know you all went into this business. And it's just a joy to be here with you today. And I hope I can answer any questions that you might have. Paul, back to you.
Yeah, thanks for that tour de force of infodemiology, this new word, this new field that you're cultivating. And I'll have you offer the screen back. And I'm going to jump into a poll as I ask one of the first questions that came up while you were talking, Lindsey, but let's get this poll out there first. It's a pretty basic one, but it's one that as a career health educator, I find myself coming back to now and then. The best way for me to counter disinformation is to focus on providing accurate information from credible sources. It's almost as if a continued offense is the best defense rather than playing defense. But because of your point that networks are so socially powered, one wonders if simply getting information is preaching to the choir, and if one just has to sort of find their way into new networks. So as we wait for the response to that, let me, hey, Heather, if you want to jump on, we're a small enough group that we could have you ask this question yourself. Let me see if I can find.
I can articulate it if you would like.
Is Heather on?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Heather,
Okay,
why don't
cool.
you jump in with that question?
Absolutely. Hi, Lindsey. I'm Heather Lanthorn. No, I had just kind of asked a question, but maybe you can use it as a teachable moment about sort of the Nicki Minaj statement yesterday that then blew up about, kind of about the Met Gala and being forced to get a vaccine, and then some specific incident that happened and her needing to do her own research. And so maybe you can use that a little bit as a lever. I don't know if we exactly count that as a conspiracy theorist, but it's a high profile person. A lot of people sort of roundly mocked her for like, well, what own research is Nicki Minaj going to be doing? And yet it was an extremely public event. So thought maybe it could be a moment for you to maybe use your script or something else to tell us how nerdy girls or other people could and should react to such things.
Heather, that's such a great question. And it's definitely timely, right? Like I, as an aside, I mean, when I was getting my PhD all those years ago, I don't think I ever would have guessed that my job would involve like emojis and Nicki Minaj, right? So it's kind of like a weird world we're all living in now. But I think it's such a great example because this, while I'm doing my own research, comes up a lot. And I'll tell you through my lens how I see that. I see that it's not about the research, it's about the messenger, right? I think Nicki Minaj is probably seeing all the messages about the vaccine safety, but we need the messenger, the right messenger to get to her. And I will tell you, I was so impressed. Kizmika Corbett, Dr. Kizzy, who is one of the designers of the Moderna vaccine, she is amazing. And if you go look at her Twitter response to Nicki Minaj, I was like, we need to get Nicki Minaj and Kizzy Corbett in a room together because she played it so well. She didn't belittle her. She took her concerns seriously. She answered them. It was a class act. And I was like, that's how it's done. So, and I think Kizzy is the right messenger. I do. Like she's a celebrity in her own right. and I saw that, and that was a masterclass. So again, when someone says I need to do my research, perhaps, but to me, I'm like, they haven't found that messenger yet with whom they relate. So I try to get them to the right person.
Well, I nominate you too on that one, Lindsay. You're super. And I'd love to see you together with Nikki. So here's
Oh,
the
gosh.
results. The best way to counter disinformation is focus on providing accurate information. Most people agreed with this, Lindsay. The reason that gives me pause as someone who's spent a career trying to get out credible information is it doesn't feel like it fits your two-way mode. That information dissemination feels like it's a bit one way. And so I wonder how we can temper our thinking about our professional duty if so many of us agree that, well, we're supposed to get the right stuff out there. And any concerns you'd have about the one-way nature of that?
No, and actually, I think it reinforces the two-way comms approach, because your goal here, or our goal here, is really like relationship over being right.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're trying to do is build a relationship, because
Yep.
changing behavior rarely involves seeing one post and being like, oh, okay, right? So like, you're building a relationship, and being in conversation is really the best way to do it. But in this conversation, we realized what credible content our audience needed.
Mm-hmm.
So like, we have an editorial calendar, and we're answering some questions, but really through a close read of the comments and people reaching out to us, we learned that people wanted us to play a strong offense. They
Yep.
wanted us to serve as a one-stop curated shop for all COVID information, which I don't think I would have anticipated going in. So I think they're actually consistent with each other. They're not contradictory.
Yeah, got it. So people are underway reflecting on this question as well, Lindsay. Who do you consider the most trusted sources for providing health communication in your field? Obviously, if there's none of the above here, you can jump into the chat and give Lindsay and I some ideas of what you think are the right, most credible people. Let me, as we're waiting for that answer, Lindsay, reflect on a point you made, that you try to teach people how to be gentle but effective in their communication. That struck me. That sometimes it feels to me like some of our best learning comes about when we're a bit tense about something, or if there's a bit of conflict going on. So is this a personality based from a former Texas girl who had plenty of times that she had to gently deliver a message where she disagreed with her colleagues around and about that state? Or is there some science you're leaning on that says my getting in your face is less effective than my soft pedaling my
So there is good science behind this. And I am Texan indeed, but I'm like a feisty fighting Texan. So actually, I have to check myself, because I'm a little, I'm ready to tussle typically.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
there's very good, convincing empirical evidence that empathy is really the only approach. Again, because the goal is to stay in conversation, and people really need to feel heard before they're willing to listen. So empathy really is empirically demonstrated to be effective in these health promotion type settings. And like I said, this can be hard for me, because I can, sometimes I'm more aggressive than empathetic, but I'm learning. It's a journey.
One of your first slides said, "We love facts." I love that. Here's the results of poll number 2. Who do you consider the most trusted sources of providing health communication in your organization? I find this a bit interesting, because we often do look to our human resources colleagues as the purveyors of the company messages. But here it's saying executive leaders, 15%, grassroots leaders, lower than I would have expected. But most people here are saying health experts from outside the organization. Let me remind you, Lindsay, that about half of our audience is usually health experts from outside the organizations. So one has to wonder if there's a little bit of a bias into this answer. But what say you about this distribution?
So I actually can't see it, but just from your qualitative characterization.
I got ahead of myself. There.
Okay, no, that's perfect. So so okay, this is interesting. So I would call this the McKinsey effect, where you bring in McKinsey, right? When you when you have some sensitive things to discuss. And I do
Yeah.
think that I think there's a credibility issue at play, right? So I think it's this Venn diagram of who's a credible messenger and a trusted messenger. And so that's why I think the outside expertise who somehow has a connection and is relatable to you.
Yeah.
That's a really powerful combination.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I've done a lot of work, a lot of outside expert talks back in my home state of Texas or here in New Hampshire where I live. I really will only take a Q&A fireside chat on that order if I have a personal connection with the organization.
Yeah, cool. So that Venn diagram works when you've got that connection.
In my experience, yeah.
So another poll, what best describes the role of health coaches in improving health literacy? I loved your personal stories about when you've had a chance to be out there personally health coaching. So I asked which describes the role in your organization. You've already equipped your health coaches with being information literate, and health literacy is one of their skill sets, because you made that point very well, Lindsey, that there's a difference between teaching about subject matter content and teaching about health literacy with respect to evaluating content. So I don't know, it's my training as a health coach that I was trained specifically in teaching people about health literacy. Others have an option if we plan to increase information literacy skills. Another answer could be information health literacy is not part of our health coaching, or we don't use health coaches and don't see that as a role. So I'm going to end this poll and show you these results. And let me ask a question along with your reaction to these results. Most people here are saying they feel like their health coaches are equipped to teach about health literacy, but almost as many are saying we really either don't use coaches or we don't see that as a role for them. When you said we love facts, what jumped into my head immediately was the now infamous, there are alternative facts, that the pundit said. But, the more I thought about that, I thought she's not all that crazy to have said that. There are plenty of arguments that pundits engage in all the time where they cherry pick their facts. I mean, they counter your facts with other facts that may not be as well established or may not have been through peer review, but they're truths that they're hanging on to. So, health coaches are trained to overcome ambivalence. And let me admit right away to the ambivalence I feel about this new field of infodemiology is it's such a moving target. There's so much new information, some that can counter others.
Yeah, so my reaction to that is I sympathize to those who are like, this is not my lane, because a year and a half ago, this is not my lane either, right? But I've been through some things now, and I think it is our lane, and we're doing this already, right? Like health coaches already dealing with misinformation. I mean, it's popping up in conversations you're having with people. So I don't think you can choose for it not to be your lane. That doesn't mean that like it needs to be your strategic priority to get everybody in epidemiology class, but the good news is very low barriers to entry for this work. So newsliteracy.org, the Newslit organization, all the tools you need. You can go to them and you are well on your way. Librarians, I don't know how many people on this call have taken a look at what librarians do recently. I really hadn't prior to getting to this work. This is what they do. They literally teach people information hygiene. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of finding resources. There are lesson plans. There are, the resources are out there, right? Like, what are the hallmarks of good reporting? Like, what's a solid fact checker? How do you take on a healthcare myth? So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think it's all of our lanes because it crops up in our clients' worldviews.
Yep, got it. Another poll, honestly, if I find myself speaking with a conspiracy theory believer, I'm most likely to A, listen, connect, seek to understand right out of your PowerPoint. B, listen earnestly and try to persuade them to change their minds. C, personally, honestly, I'm likely to disengage and hold my tongue. We Minnesota nice Catholics tend to fall into that lane. Or four, I turn red and I tell them they're crazy. So I'll give you a second to land on that one. But another point you made, Lindsay, that's in this neighborhood is you said our field is beleaguered. I think that's true of science generally. I think it's true of health promotion generally. The Wall Street Journal had a feature article yesterday about, well, it was called Wellness Influencers and their anti-vaxxer messaging. So we often get called wellness professionals, we health promotion professionals, and that's not exactly the league we want to play in. But if you listen to our colleagues here, they're kind of split. They're kind of like we Minnesota nice folks. We tend to disengage and hold my tongue. But a good number of them, 20% or actually 50% are kind of in the neighborhood you favor people being, listening, connecting, listening earnestly. Good chunk try to change their mind. Very few of us are just saying people are crazy. So help me out here as a believer soul.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you my processes. So initially, I turn red and tell them they're crazy in my inside voice. So like I get that out, right? Like, because I feel triggered, like I truly do, right? Like it is a physical response in my body that I have to move through before I can like engage my prefrontal cortex again. I have to let my amygdala do its thing. So I get mad. And then I usually choose between disengage and hold my tongue, or listen earnestly and try to persuade them to change their thinking. And I will tell you what my filter is. If I do not have a personal connection with this person, I disengage and hold my tongue, because I truly don't believe I can make a difference. And, if they are a longtime Dear Pandemic follower, I consider that a personal enough connection, right? So one thing that I want to honor, like everyone on this call and those of us who are beleaguered, is that this is hard, heavy emotional work. And like, you have to save your psychological resources. So I don't mess with it if it's not inside my sphere of influence. It's how I keep myself sane.
Got it. Thank you for that permission to disengage if I need to. I think this is a truth, but I want to hear how strongly people feel about this notion that peddlers of wild falsehoods actually have a distinct advantage over we fact-based truth tellers. And I don't think it was in this presentation, Lindsay, but you've talked in the past about storytelling and how powerful that can be. And I think this gets us into that neighborhood, that the story that the peddlers of falsehoods are telling are just pretty hard to turn away from. They're like car wrecks that, you're rubbernecking and you say, how can I not look at that? And those of us who are not having a car wreck of a conversation about our facts have a different story to tell. So what you see here is most agree, 30, 44% agree that the purveyors of falsehoods have the advantage. More than I anticipated say they're not sure about this and some disagree. What's your take on leveling the playing field, if you will?
Yeah, so I strongly agree with this. There's some on the call who might have heard of Brandolini's law, which is, it's harder to clean up misinformation than put it out. Sort of similar, like it's harder to clean up a well, it's really easy to poison it, right? I believe that's the case with misinformation too. And there's a couple of reasons. One, again, stories are psychologically privileged in our brains. So if you hear the story of a child who contracts autism 2 weeks after he gets his shots, that's what lodges in your brain. Not that all sorts of things happen when kids are 2 years old developmentally, and that these are likely coincidental, right? You could show that out of, 2 million people, nobody had, that does not matter. Like stories go where statistics can't in terms of our hearts and our minds. So, I think a bad actor definitely can play on that, and we can turn those tactics, but it's hard because I think about statistics, not stories. And the second reason is it is very easy to grab people's attention playing on fear and outrage. And if you play on fear and outrage, you will get more attention. Your story is more likely to go viral, but you are pandering to the basest of human instincts. And so it is empirically harder to get out a message that's centered in kindness, compassion, and scientific fact, which is why you need the relationship, because fear and outrage get you in the moment.
Yep.
But the relationship is going to determine how you behave over time when there's a health sensitive thing. So I think there's like a long run versus short run sort of thing. If you want to go viral in the moment, you tell a story, a misleading story, and you engage kind of the basis of human instincts. We are in it for the longer game as nerdy girls.
Yeah.
So we are really building relationships.
Kelly has a nice way of thinking about this. Kelly says it's like when a lawyer utters inadmissible evidence and then you can't unhear it.
Totally.
Clever. All right, so let me have you predict the results of this poll, because this one I struggle with, as a lot of people in my field do. I'm a target often for, there's just a couple bloggers in our field. It's not a big deal, but it's the ones that are out there not only have the advantage, but they'll personally attack and they'll simply lie about you. And I struggle with this question. Do you ignore them? Because that's exactly what they're trying to do, is bait you, and they'll go on and on if you respond to them. Or do you, if they're telling lies about you, you dispute their claims and counter with facts. Do you have a preference here?
I
and a
do.
prediction? What will our audience say?
Yeah, I want to hear what the audience has to say.
Well, let me hear your prediction and then I'll show you.
Dispute.
Yeah, I actually hear that more often than hold your tongue. They're pretty split on this one, Lindsay. Which totally captures my ambivalence. Half the time I say, God, I should respond to this.
Yeah.
But I always tilt on just shutting up and letting them, peter out, for lack of fuel.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think that this is context specific, right? So if it's some pesky person who doesn't have a big following and they're, coming at you personally, you're just like, whatever, like.
Yeah.
But there have been times when somebody's come after our credibility or has tried to peddle some sort of piece of junk. And then we do what's called tell a truth sandwich, which is an empirically verified way to go about debunking, where you state the truth, mention the myth, state the truth again. And so you serve up a truth sandwich, and then you stop. Because I do agree that these people often feed. I mean, we have some pretty nasty trolls. I think the worst trolls that we get are anti-trans trolls. They're very coordinated. We have had to stand up for ourselves, but we don't get into locked battle with them.
Got it. So vaccine mandates are the right policy strategy at this point. In the infodemic world, this one I struggle with too, Lindsay. In the New York Times, after Biden made his mandate pronouncement, I read an ACLU commentary that was totally persuasive, saying, of course he did the right thing for all these right reasons. And then I read another commentary from an equally brilliant writer, and I totally bought the arguments that this was not the right move. So that's the risk of having an open mind when you go into these conversations, is, now I'm left with this sense that, there's not a compelling way to say in absolute terms that this policy makes total sense, when there are perfectly smart people that can say this made no sense, and their arguments stuck. They seem right. I happen to fall on the side of saying this is totally right thing to do, and our president, Karen Mosley, early on, she beat most other leaders to making our conference of mandated vaccine policy. So I'm totally in agreement with hers. But here's our audience, pretty much in agreement, but per maybe the reason I named, there's a good number of us that are not quite so sure yet that mandates are the way to go. Do the nerdy girls have a point of view?
We don't, on the record. So I am a health policy PhD, and you will almost never get a health policy PhD or someone who is a policy analyst to say this is good or bad or right or wrong. right? There are no silver bullets in healthcare, only tough trade-offs.
Yeah.
So the way that I think about this is if you do a mandate, what are the trade-offs? Who are you pissing off? What are you giving up on the other end? And maybe you as a leader are okay with that trade-off. But there's just no silver bullet. There are going to be consequences to vaccine mandates. So we don't opine on policy almost ever. I mean, I'm trying to think of a policy platform that we could opine on, science is good or something. But that is, that is because literally I am a health policy PhD. I worked for policymakers for a decade, and I know that you read the stakeholder landscape, you make a policy, it's a judgment call with respect to which trade-offs you're willing to bear.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I don't like federal mandates in general, but with this,
yeah. I tended to like it to seatbelt use and helmet use and non-smokers' rights. That there's going to be state by state variation. I'm not expecting Tennessee to be Minnesota when it comes to smokers' rights.
Yeah, exactly.
But the feds, I thought, did the right thing for what it's worth. So last question. I'm just going to leave you with a really easy one because we're thinking of doing a think tank specifically on spirituality at work. And my question for my colleagues has been, do we get to talk about religion, or do we keep it this generic, very secular conversation where we don't talk about our actual beliefs? So I ask our folks here, the people's political positions are the elephant in the room, no pun intended, related to vaccine beliefs. What's the closest to your approach in the workplace? Again, you really pitched us on the workplace as a great place to do infodemiology. I ask, is it talking politics? Is still taboo, and I won't go there. I'm open, but I'm a conflict avoider. Or finally, it's time for frankly sharing our political and religious views as they're part of meeting at work. Let me do one more prediction from you before I launch the results on this one. Where do you think people tend to lie on this one?
Oh my goodness, number 2.
Yeah. So like me, another Minnesota nice. I wish we could talk about this, but I'm just too nice to piss people off, and I don't want to go into the conflict zone.
And there's some like legal stickiness
Yeah.
around that too, I think.
Well, tell it to Chick-fil-A. I mean, there are plenty of companies that have, worn their values on their chest and say, we're a Christian-based organization. Certainly, there are plenty of private sector hospital systems that, throw out the Christian context. What's the downside? Why? Give me some advice here before we sign off. Why don't I get to talk about religion at one of the next hero think tanks?
Me? You want me to answer that?
Yeah, I'm listening. Whatever you say, I'm going to do. So get it right, please.
I have to be honest. I don't know about personal conversations or divulging this information. I'm not a pro, but I will say this. We have to recognize that our political and religious beliefs frame how we process health information. So we got to own it, right? Yep. And so when I write for Dear Pandemic, I am like, this is a trusted Republican website that has good vaccine information. This is a trusted website run by Democrats that has good information. Here are good vaccine resources for people of the Christian faith. Here are good vaccine resources for people of the Muslim faith. Mm-hmm. So I don't necessarily talk about people's personal views, but I do try to source information from good, credible information from both sides of the political aisle and interfaith places too.
Yep. Lindsey, I think you're brilliant. I just so love chatting with you. I just love what you guys are up to. I'm a big ally and fan of Nerdy Girls. I want to be officially one of the first Nerdy Girl white male elder allies. So count me in.
Awesome.
And just hearing what a good teacher you are makes me just want to wrap up by reminding folks, as much as I started our session by saying I'm pissed, I'm disappointed, I'm angry about the infodemic that caused, I think, our need to cancel the live portion of this forum that we have coming up the week of October 11th through 15th. That does not diminish in any way my enthusiasm for what we are going to bring you guys. This is going to be a rockin' virtual conference with smart people like Lindsey, hour after hour, giving us valuable information. We really have reorganized it in ways that are sensitive to time zones, that gives you a ton of on-demand content that you can listen to whenever you want, that still has remote networking and some of the best keynotes we've ever been able to recruit to our conference. They're all still coming back. They're all still at their appointed time. You're going to see them without masks, so you can see them persuade you with their direct personable interaction on Zoom. So Lindsey, thanks again. And we are so grateful for your good work. Everyone better get on Dear Pandemic.